This video is going to get us through regulation of temperature and body fluids in lecture. The first thing for you to define in this chapter is thermoregulation. If you take the prefix that thermo means temperature, and hopefully you guys all know what regulation means, so this is temperature regulation. Different organisms do this in different ways. There are ectothermic animals, which is what the average person would consider to be cold-blooded. And there are endothermic creatures, which, again, the average person would consider to be warm-blooded. Now, ectothermic creatures, they use the environment to help them maintain their temperature. If they start to get cold, they can go sun themselves, like the turtles in the upper picture here. If they start to get too hot, they can get into the water or go into a shady place, but they're using the environment more to help them maintain their temperature. That said, they are not the same temperature as their environment. That's a common misconception that people have. They're just using the environment to help them maintain everything. Endothermic or warm-blooded creatures, they maintain a more narrow range of temperature, and they have more regulatory mechanisms to help them do that. Like they can sweat, they can shiver, they have fat tissue, they can have countercurrent exchange systems, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. So the bird, the painted bunting in the bottom picture, that one is an endothermic creature. And it's actually holding the wing down to try to help maintain temperature. In this case, it's trying to radiate off some of its excess heat to cool down because it has gotten excessively warm in that picture. How does countercurrent exchange help to maintain temperatures? This one is a tough one, and there's not really one short answer to this. Countercurrent exchange systems are when you have blood vessels that are lying right next to each other side by side. And what will happen is they can swap things between those blood vessels that are lying side by side. So here in this picture, we've got veins that are taking blood back towards the upper part of the body, and we've got arteries that are taking blood away from the main core of the body. By putting the veins directly next to the arteries, we're allowing them to exchange heat between them, and that exchange of temperature can help regulate body temperature just a little bit. So showing you that on a different picture. So these are both well, I'm going to talk about the goose, I guess, primarily. But this is a creature that lives in a cold place, and those feet are directly in very cold water. That means the veins that are coming back from the feet towards the main part of the body would have blood that is actually very cold, and that would cool off the core body, which is not good for the heart, the lungs, the brain. And so by running the veins right beside the arteries have warmer temperatures because they're coming from the core. By swapping some of that heat back, it warms the blood back up as it gets back to the core. So countercurrent exchanges are a way for blood vessels to swap heat so that we can maintain temperature in the core better and not bring cold blood back to the core that could shock the core. Anytime I say core, just think, vital organs, again, heart, lung, brains, those don't like a lot of temperature fluctuation in endothermic creatures, and so countercurrent exchanges can help out with that some. Just stuff on maintenance of heat for endothermic creatures. Not only do we have those countercurrent exchange systems, but we can actually alter our metabolism to help us maintain a certain temperature. If we start to get too hot, we can slow down metabolism. That is going to stop us from producing too much heat and helping us maintain a lower temperature. If we start to get too cold, which this little boy looks like he's too cold, we can actually up our metabolism. That's going to help us generate more heat to keep our temperature where it's supposed to be. So the shivering that's happening here, that is part of the metabolic process that's going to help elevate body temperature. And so endothermic things can just behaviorally change some of their metabolic aspects to change their temperature so that they don't fall out of range and become hyperthermic, too hot, or hypothermic, too cold. So this is just sort of something that I would assume people would know coming out of high school, but it's what's an example of an ectothermic creature in this case. Birds and mammals are the only endotherms out there. So squirrels and hamsters, those are mammals. Bird is bird. And so lobster is the one example of something that would be cold-blooded or ectothermic. All right, what is osmoregulation? Osmo means water. So this time we're regulating water balance. Different creatures do this in different ways, and believe it or not, the bird in this picture is doing its own form of osmoregulation and taking it out on that kid all at the same time. Now, when birds poop, they're not just pooping. Their poop actually contains their form of urine too, which is the white stuff that goes around the poop. That is their form of nitrogenous waste, and that is their way to regulate their water balance. And so that's why I can say this bird is osmoregulating, because it's not just pooping, it's also peeing at the same time. Their pee just looks very different from ours. What is excretion, and what are the three forms of nitrogenous waste? So you need to know excretion is the elimination of metabolic waste. Generally speaking, when we talk about excretion here, we're going to be talking about the removal of nitrogen-containing waste. Nitrogen is brought into the body in proteins because proteins are made out of amino acids, and all amino acids have amino groups which have this nitrogen in it. Different organisms can deal with that nitrogen in different ways. So the first one that we're going to talk about is ammonia. You need to know that ammonia is NH3. You need to know that the organisms that get rid of their nitrogenous waste as ammonia tend to be aquatic. The reason for that is ammonia is fairly toxic. You have to dilute it with a bunch of water in order to not kill your tissues. Well, things that live in the water don't have any problem doing that. And so that's why aquatic animals can do this. It does mean they pee a lot, though. I don't know if you guys have ever caught a fish, but if you hold it out of the water for any length of time, chances are it's going to pee on you. And that's because they have to get rid of all of that ammonia, otherwise it builds up and it will kill them. Next one that we're going to talk about is urea. You don't have to know the chemical formula for urea. It's a little bit more complex than just NH3 for ammonia, but urea is a little bit less toxic than ammonia. So things that aren't as readily available to water, this is how we're going to tend to keep our nitrogen waste inside of us because it is less toxic. You need to know the examples of critters that do it this way, and that includes us. When we urinate, there's urea in our urine, and that is how we're getting rid of our nitrogenous waste. Last example, uric acid is a much more concentrated form of nitrogen-containing wastes. Notice that it has 4 nitrogens compared to our 2, and fish's just 1. This means that they need even less water to try to dilute it. And so these are going to tend to be things that either need to be light or don't have a lot of water available to them. And so, yes, birds need to be light. This is one of our lighter forms of waste. Reptiles and insects, they tend to not have as much water available to them, so they get rid of it in uric acid crystals as well. After that, I gave you this picture to label. This is something that we've already talked about in lab, I believe. Now I want to find my lab schedule, but I think we've already done the urinary system. This is so sad. I don't remember what we've done. Yay, we did. And so, yeah, you've got your anatomy stuff down. Just pause your video and get it defined for you guys there. What's the function of the following organs? So your kidneys carry out filtration of blood. When we filter the blood, we produce urine, eventually, and that urine contains our nitrogenous waste. The ureter takes urine from the kidneys to the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder stores urine and releases it when it's, how do I want to say that? More acceptable for you to release it, I suppose. And then the urethra is what is going to take the urine from the urinary bladder out of the body. All of that is stuff that we discussed already in Lab 2, and so that should make life nice and simple as we go through there. Pretty much already hit that stuff. I do want to pause for a minute on urethra just to kind of show you a couple of differences between the male and the female urethra. One, the urethra in the female is straight up excretory in nature. It does not have a reproductive function. The male's, on the other hand, is both excretory and reproductive because sperm will go through there and so will urine at separate times. The males also have a prostate gland that encircles a portion of the urethra. Females don't have a prostate, so we don't have a prostatic urethra. This is one of the reasons why men tend to have problems urinating as they get older, is the prostate enlarges and it pinches off the urethra inside of there. Women don't have a similar problem because we don't have that. Women have a much shorter urethra. Men's has to be as long as the penis and the prostate, and so it is a longer organ. That is medically relevant because if they're going to catheterize a person because there's a surgery coming up or because a person is incontinent, the catheter has to be inserted much farther up a male than it does a female. But from a more everyday perspective, the downside to having such a short urethra is women are far more likely to get urinary tract infections than men, and that's because bacteria can travel this short tube much more readily than they can travel this very long tube. Couple that with the fact that women have to wipe after every bathroom event versus men only have to do it after number twos, if you would. And so they're just less likely to be spreading bacteria from the anus towards the urethra. And if they do, they're doing something very wrong, essentially, as they go through there. So there are some downsides to having that shorter urethra, and I just kind of wanted to get that in there. All right. What is a nephron? It is the filtering unit of a kidney. What's happening within a nephron? 3 things, and they are the 3 things that come after this picture: filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. Those 3 steps are what filter the waste out of our blood and then concentrate it into urine that we're going to be getting rid of. Make sure to include all the components of a nephron. So this is one picture. I like this picture because it's kind of simple, but we have the glomerulus inside the Bowman's capsule. We have a proximal convoluted tubule, a loop of Henle, a distal convoluted tubule, which hooks up to a collecting duct. All of these little nubs would have been other nephrons that were attached to that, but they took them out in this picture just so you can see it. You got your renal cortex up here and your medulla down below the blood vessels. This would be the papilla of the renal pyramid, which is where our urine is going to drip into a calyx, which we talked about in the lab portion of the course. But I gave you this picture, and so pause the video and get all your labels down. It's the same stuff. What else did I want to say here? It's the same stuff. It's just I pulled this one from a different textbook. This does also get you a little bit more on the anatomy of the kidney off to the side. And so these are your structures that make up the nephron. All right. Functional unit of the kidney is the nephron. That's what we were just kind of talking about. Which part of the nephron would you predict would receive the greatest damage from chronic hypertension? Well, hypertension is high blood pressure, and so it would be the part that has the blood supply. So the glomerulus is a little ball of capillaries. It would be the structure most likely to be damaged if you had high blood pressure. So Bowman's capsule and glomerulus, although really it's the glomerulus itself. Okay, define filtration. Filtration, the first thing you need to know is it happens at the glomerulus. Second thing you need to know about it is the process of filtration takes almost all of the liquid out of the blood, empties it into the nephron to create filtrate. Now, filtrate is what I like to call pre-urine. We make several hundred liters of filtrate every day, and hopefully you guys all know you don't pee several hundred liters of filtrate every day. So we're going to modify the filtrate a bunch as it goes through the tube in the next couple of steps, but filtration gets the process started. Almost all of the plasma leaks out and it fills this tube, and so filtrate is essentially just plasma. Next, reabsorption. Reabsorption puts the good stuff back into the bloodstream. So most of the water, it's going to go back. Nutrients like glucose and amino acids that we filtered out but don't really want to get rid of, we're going to put those back. Reabsorption can be either passive, which means it just happens through diffusion, or it can be active, which means your body is spending energy in order to put the good stuff back. But the end result is we're putting most of the volume of the filtrate that we created back into the bloodstream. Third and final step, secretion. First thing you need to know about secretion is it is an active process. That again means you must spend energy to secrete something when we're talking about urine formation. What we're going to do, this is our last-ditch effort to get rid of anything bad that is still in the blood. So if we reabsorbed some molecule that we didn't want to, like let's say Tylenol, we can get rid of that Tylenol through secretion. Different drugs get secreted at different rates. That rate actually helps determine how often you're supposed to take a pill. Like you can take Tylenol every 4 to 6 hours, but naproxen, you take that every 12 hours. That's because they're not secreted at the same rate. And there's enzymes that are at play there too. But secretion is again just our last ditch effort to get rid of bad stuff from the blood and make sure we get rid of it in the urine. Once we're done with all 3 of those steps, filtration, reabsorption, and secretion, then we have converted the filtrate to urine, and we can get rid of that urine through the act of excretion, or it is usually called micturition, is urination. Filtration of the blood takes place in the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. So filtration is happening here. The reabsorption and secretion happens in the rest of the nephron from the proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, and distal convoluted tubule. A little bit can happen at the collecting duct too, but we won't talk about that so much. How do the following hormones influence urine formation? So ADH is antidiuretic hormone. If you have not had anything to drink in a little bit and your body is starting to get a little dehydrated, you will secrete antidiuretic hormone, and it will slow your kidneys down so that you slow down the process of urine formation. In other words, what this is going to do is it's going to start taking most of the water out of your urine and putting it back into the bloodstream, and your urine is going to get much darker and more concentrated. So when you wake up in the morning after a whole night of not taking a drink, your urine is darker in the morning because ADH helped you conserve that water so that your blood pressure didn't drop too much. So that's why your urine gets like that when you haven't had a drink in a while. If you have been drinking plenty of fluids, your urine is much less yellow. It's more kind of watery colored, still a little bit yellow, but not as dark. That's because you made less antidiuretic hormone so that you could get rid of all of your extra blood volume and again, still help maintain your blood pressure where it's supposed to be. Your urine formation is directly related to your blood pressure. If your blood pressure gets to be too high, your body wants to pee out that excess pressure essentially. And so it's going to get rid of blood volume by getting rid of more plasma. If your blood pressure starts to get too low, we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to secrete this hormone, make our urine more concentrated, and put as much of the water from the urine back into the bloodstream so that we can keep our blood pressure up where it's supposed to be. Aldosterone is released at the same time that ADH is released, but it works in a different way. What aldosterone does is it makes your kidney reabsorb sodium ions. And wherever sodium ions go, water wants to follow. And so by reabsorbing sodium, water is going to chase it down, and it's another way for you to prevent dehydration and keep your blood pressure where it's supposed to be. The other thing that I'll just kind of mention as I'm on this slide here, because it's the reason we're doing everything online right now, coronavirus, it specifically has this spike protein on it, and that spike protein attaches to an ACE receptor that's present on so many cells of your body. Well, that enzyme is part of this mechanism that helps you release both ADH and aldosterone. And it's talking about the aldosterone basically up here in this particular part. But this is one of the ways that you maintain your blood pressure, which is why that enzyme is present on almost all of your cells. Your blood pressure must be very carefully registered and maintained where it's supposed to be. And this is part of that pathway, which is why coronavirus can affect everybody so very differently. It's because it's on so many different kinds of cells in your body. What is dialysis and why would a person need it? I'm going to start with the back half. A person would need it because their kidneys are no longer functioning. If you are suffering from renal failure, your kidneys can no longer filter the waste out of your body, which means you're being poisoned by your body because it can't get rid of the waste. What is dialysis? It's otherwise known as hemodialysis. It is, we hook you up to a machine. The machine filters the waste out of your plasma and gets rid of it so you're not poisoning your body anymore. For this one, I've got a little video I'm going to show you parts of. It helps to explain dialysis a little bit better, and it's narrated by an adorable little girl. Man, this video did not used to have ads.
This is what I do at dialysis. First, I make sure that my shoes are off, and then I go over to the scale.
All right, so her mom is making a video to explain what dialysis is because some of the kids at her school were bullying her for the lines that you will see here in just a moment. So the little girl's just kind of describing what happens as she goes through the process of dialysis, and they take her weight, they take her temperature, they do some stuff. I'm going to kind of skip through a lot of this stuff at the very beginning and get to where she starts to explain stuff.
blood, and then they take my blood pressure and then take a little bit of blood from my lines, and then they start checking my lines.
What is your lines? Can you tell us? Just that a lot of people probably don't know.
Well, it's my catheter, and it starts here, and it goes in right here.
Oh, okay. And what does it help you do?
Well, what they do is they hook me up to that machine right there.
This big thing, huh?
And they say it's my robo-kidney. And what it does is, there's a red tube that comes out and a blue tube. The red takes out the blood, and the blood goes into that machine and it cleans it.
Okay.
And the blue tube puts the blood back in.
All right, so that's basically the shortest, cleanest definition of dialysis you're ever going to get. It takes her blood out, it cleans it, and it puts it back in her body. The machine is much more efficient than a kidney. So a person who's on dialysis has to go, depending on how well their kidneys are still functioning, 2 to 4 times a week. And generally speaking, they're going to be hooked up to the machine for about 3 hours, but it again varies person to person. And then the machine just gets to work filtering the blood. So that's what dialysis is. Oh, I don't want to close all the tabs. I just wanted to close that one. Okay, so coming back to this. Next, which could the following thing indicate if it's present in the urine? Oh, I guess I had a slide before I got there, didn't I? Okay, so kidney transplants. If a person is on dialysis, chances are they are waiting for a kidney transplant. The dialysis is a stopgap that gets them to the point where they can get a kidney. The waiting list for a kidney is years for the most part, although if you can find a directed donor, you can have it done a little bit sooner. This picture is all these pictures are from the same thing. So this gentleman, his name is Michael Langley. This is Yvonne Dunn. They had been dating for 10 years. Let's see. This is them doing the transplants to get his kidney put into her because her kidneys had failed. So this was a directed donation. It only works if the blood types match and there's less risk of rejection of the organ and whatnot. But this is just your little people on dialysis. They're waiting for this. I also just kind of want to mention this was something that I just learned very recently. I was reading the Consumer Reports, and it talked about some of the algorithms that are used to calculate whether or not a person actually needs a kidney transplant. What they do is they measure a person's what's known as glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. You would think that that would just be something that could be measured, and then if your filtration rate was too low, your kidney didn't work, you would be put on the kidney transplant list. But what I found out is apparently this is one of those times where medicine is racist. And they multiply the person's GFR by 1.21 if they are African American, which means they are less likely to be put on a transplant list until their kidneys are failing at a higher rate than a white person or Hispanics person kidney would be. So here's what I want to stress, since Tarrant County tends to have a lot more diversity than other areas where I work. If you have a person in your family who is suffering from any type of kidney disease, and you have been told that their GFR is too high and they don't qualify for a kidney transplant list, ask for another test that does not use the racist algorithm that would make your relative or even potentially you less likely to be put onto the transplant list. If you can find somebody who will advocate for you, there are more reliable tests where they don't use that algorithm. There was a little bit of science behind what they were trying to do there, and as it turns out, that science really was making it so that African Americans did not receive the medical treatment that they needed in a timely manner, and they would often die then on a transplant list because they didn't get on it for several years after they should have been on it because of that algorithm. So that sort of stuff makes me very, very mad, but advocate for yourself. All right, so what could it mean if these things were in the urine? I mentioned this one earlier. So glucose. If there's glucose in your urine, it might mean that you have diabetes mellitus. Or, as I said in lab, it might just mean the person just ate a bunch of sugar. If a person is going in for a urinalysis, they are supposed to fast before they go in for the urinalysis. But if they just ate, that might trick the doctor into thinking that the person has diabetes. Number 2, albumin. Pardon me. If there's albumin in the urine, albumin is something that's present in your plasma, but it's supposed to be reabsorbed. If it is in your urine, it means that your nephron's damaged and it's not being reabsorbed like it's supposed to. So if there's albumin in it, you have a damaged nephron. If there's pus in your urine, almost always means urinary tract infection, and it tends to be a lower urinary tract infection. They're going to put you on antibiotics and hopefully make things a little bit better there. All right, just things that I want to mention on here. Now this one is something that relates back to the secretion that we were talking about. Different drugs get secreted at different rates from the body. One of the most common types of overdose that is seen in over-the-counter pain relievers is actually with acetaminophen, which is found in so many different drugs. Tylenol has it, Excedrin have it, a lot of cold relief things, they will have acetaminophen in there. And if you're not paying attention to the labels, let's say you get a cold, so you take something for a cough, but it also had acetaminophen in it. You take something for your sinuses hurt, that had acetaminophen in it. You take Tylenol to reduce your fever, that had acetaminophen in it. And as a result, you end up taking way more acetaminophen than you actually needed. And acetaminophen is highly toxic to the liver. So the discussion that I always like to have here is how many people actually knew that acetaminophen is in so many different things? How many people knew that it was so toxic to your liver? And how many of you knew that it actually caused so many overdoses all the time? And of course, that's really hard for us to have that discussion since this is an online asynchronous class. But I just want you guys to be aware of that and to make sure you're not taking too much, because liver damage death is a slow and painful death. That is not a way that you want to go. So just make sure you're not taking too much acetaminophen. This one just asked, do you currently read and follow the guidelines? Well, if you're not reading the instructions on any over-the-counter med that you're taking, maybe it's because your parents have just given you that drug forever, so you assume you know how it's used. Please read the instructions on the drug to make sure you're taking it correctly. Then there's this one. This is one that is a debate that sports physiologists, physical trainers, and weekend warriors, they all seem to know what is the best way to hydrate, and they always seem to link it to you need some form of Gatorade or Powerade or electrolytes. But the best way to rehydrate yourself is water. If you're adding things to your drink, you're making it more hypertonic to your cells, which means you can actually dehydrate yourself over time if you are consuming those. Now that said, if you're doing a very long, intense workout where you're sweating a lot, then you do need some more electrolytes to get into your system. But if you're just doing 30 minutes to an hour, just water is all you need, and that is fine. All right. After that, there are some group work things, and again, we can't really do the group work, so I want you guys to consider those just challenge questions. You guys are welcome to, group me or work together to try to do that. The last page of the notes here has a coloring quiz for you, and then 4 little questions that are under that. For your assignment for this week, you're going to complete that coloring quiz and then upload it into Blackboard for me to grade.